As global trade tensions simmer, President Donald Trump is focusing attention on one of America's most vital agricultural exports, soybeans. With the tariff truce with China set to expire tomorrow, Trump is urging Beijing to quadruple its soybean orders, emphasizing the critical role of U.S. farmers in the international market. For decades, soybeans have been a cornerstone of U.S. China trade. Early August saw Trump navigating to high-stakes trade challenges simultaneously, extending a 90-day tariff truce with China to allow for continued negotiations, while facing growing tensions with Canada after a 35% tariff on non-USMCA goods took effect. At the center of both disputes lies agriculture, a sector crucial for domestic stability and global trade. In a detailed post on Truth Social, President Trump stressed the urgency of increased Chinese purchases. China is worried about its shortage of soybeans. Our great farmers produce the most robust soybeans. I hope China will quickly quadruple its soybean orders. The truce with China was designed to prevent an immediate tariff escalation while addressing broader trade disputes including high-tech export controls and access to critical minerals. But for Trump, soybeans became the immediate focus. With the U.S. harvest approaching, supplies are about to surge. Securing substantial Chinese orders now could stabilize domestic prices and reassure farmers in the Midwest. For China, which has diversified soybean imports toward Brazil and other suppliers, agreeing to larger U.S. purchases represents a low-cost way to maintain leverage while keeping negotiations moving. China enters these negotiations from a stronger position than during the Phase 1 trade talks. Beyond diversified supply chains, Beijing controls critical resources, including rare earth minerals and specialized magnets essential for clean energy and defense industries. These assets give China bargaining power far beyond agriculture. For the U.S., steady agricultural sales may come with broader geopolitical trade considerations. The Trump administration has hinted at potential flexibility on areas like export controls and scaled-back chip sales, which could link soybean purchases to larger strategic concessions. While Trump pushes for agricultural wins with China, his tariff policy is straining a key neighbor, Canada. Since August 1st, U.S. goods imported outside USMCA rules face a 35% tariff, affecting the flow of grains like corn, wheat, and soybeans. Historically, Ontario has been the largest grain buyer, for 35 to 40 U.S. states, anchoring steady trade across the border. Higher costs and rising buy Canadian sentiment are prompting buyers to scale back orders from the U.S. and diversify sources. Any prolonged drop in Canadian demand could flood the U.S. market with surplus grain, putting downward pressure on prices and directly affecting American farmers' incomes. Trump's strategy is public and direct, applying pressure on both China and Ottawa. In contrast, Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney has adopted a measured approach, avoiding immediate retaliation while diversifying exports and maintaining open negotiations. This has allowed Canada to mitigate the impact of U.S. tariffs while holding its ground. The risk for Washington is clear. Pressing both China and Canada to hard could shrink two of America's largest agricultural markets simultaneously. If China limits purchases to maintain leverage, and Canada permanently shifts its grain sourcing, U.S. farmers could face lower prices and fewer buyers, undermining the very goals the tariffs were meant to achieve. The next 90 days will be critical. China holds valuable cards in both soybeans and strategic minerals, while Canada is demonstrating agility in global trade. For the U.S., success depends on balancing pressure with incentives, as overplaying tariffs could impact more than trade. Statistics: it could affect fields, feedlots, and grocery store shelves across the country. Caption: impact on U.S. industry beyond agriculture. Trump has also highlighted other domestic concerns. For instance, the Ford F-Series trucks built globally rely on aluminum from Quebec. Tariff measures can ripple through the auto sector, creating pressure on U.S. manufacturers and signaling that trade policies have far-reaching consequences beyond farms. After months of escalating trade tensions, August 1st marked a sharp turn. The Trump administration raised tariffs on Canadian goods not covered by USMCA, with steel and aluminum taking center stage. Steel now faces a 50% levy, the highest among all sectors, underscoring the administration's willingness to apply maximum pressure to achieve trade objectives. In early August, Canada experienced its first significant tariff under the Trump administration. But this isn't just any tariff, it's the most economically disruptive and symbolically aggressive move yet. What makes this action particularly striking isn't just the tariff rate, but the targeted sector, steel is far from a fringe export. It forms the backbone of Canada's contribution to North America's auto supply chain. By imposing steep tariffs on this critical sector, President Trump isn't just sending a message to Ottawa, he's shaking the foundations of the U.S. industrial base itself. The impact on Canadian suppliers has been immediate and severe. As one industry executive explained, it was a tremendous impact. These are customers and distributors we had been dealing with for many, many years. Unfortunately, the threat of the tariffs created an uncertain business climate, and our American business essentially evaporated overnight in February. Canada is a major supplier of steel and auto parts to U.S. manufacturers, from chassis frames to precision components. When tariffs rise, Canadian exporters are often the first to feel the squeeze. According to the Canadian Auto Parts Manufacturers Association, exports to the U.S. have already dropped by 25 to 35%. Depending on the company, these figures aren't just statistics. Behind them lie lost contracts, idle factories, and workers laid off. In Toronto, companies like Conquest Steel saw their U.S. orders collapse earlier this year, not because of actual enforcement, but because of policy uncertainty. The fear of sudden tariffs alone was enough to halt cross-border business. Rather than reacting hastily, many Canadian businesses are pivoting strategically. Companies are refocusing on domestic customers, launching new product lines, and investing in long-term manufacturing capacity. Prime Minister Mark Carney's approach is about structural resilience rather than short-term retaliation, ensuring Canada can weather the shocks while continuing to compete globally. I'm listening to Ford and General Motors, who are pivotal in this sector, start saying things like, "You're burning all of our profit," one Canadian industry insider remarked. While Canada feels the direct pain, the impact isn't stopping at the border. The U.S. auto industry is deeply dependent on Canadian steel and aluminum, especially for high-volume vehicles like the Ford F-Series trucks, which rely heavily on aluminum sourced from Quebec. As raw material costs climb due to tariffs, the cost of assembly rises. 2. Automakers can't switch suppliers overnight, and industry estimates suggest that vehicle prices could increase by several $1,000s per model in some cases, reaching up to $9,000 for vehicles most exposed to the tariff effects. In effect, while the Trump administration's tariffs are aimed at Canada, the economic hit lands squarely in Michigan and other U.S. manufacturing hubs. This trade action wasn't necessarily born from long-term strategy. Analysts note that it was part of a broader political and economic performance. Trump set a rigid August 1st deadline, challenging countries to accept bilateral deals, many of which lack deep structural substance. The combination of public deadlines, high tariffs, and aggressive messaging has created a tense environment where trade policy, domestic industry, and international diplomacy intersect. For U.S. businesses, especially in the automotive sector, the message is clear. Decisions made in Washington can ripple across borders, supply chains, and assembly lines, affecting costs, profits, and ultimately, consumers. The unfolding situation underscores the delicate balance required in trade policy. While tariffs are intended to exert pressure on foreign markets, the consequences can be immediate and far-reaching, hitting both suppliers and domestic industries. As August progresses, businesses, policymakers, and consumers alike will be watching closely to see whether this high-stakes approach produces tangible gains or unravels existing trade relationships and industrial stability. While countries like Japan, South Korea, and parts of the European Union quickly agreed to expedited trade deals, Canada took a different path. Instead of rushing under pressure, Ottawa stood its ground, signaling a commitment to measured, strategic decision-making. According to Jean Schurz, a senior member of Canada's U.S. Relations Council, many of the hastily arranged agreements elsewhere are already showing signs of strain. Canada's approach is clear: a bad deal signed under duress is not worth the ink. If the White House does things that are good for Detroit, they're going to be good for Ontario. The problem is they're aiming everywhere, hitting us all, and risking the stability of key American companies along the way. One Canadian official explained, Trump's steel tariffs were intended to punish a neighboring country, but the consequences are proving to be far-reaching, potentially affecting his own economy. While Canada is adapting, investing inward, and looking beyond the U.S. market, American automakers are contending with disrupted supply chains, rising costs, and uncertainty about how to proceed. Caption: retail and manufacturing feel the strain. The ripple effect extends beyond industrial sectors. Large retailers like Walmart and Best Buy along with companies producing everything from household items to clothing, are beginning to pass higher costs onto consumers. Even seemingly small items from shampoo to shoes carry hidden tariff-driven price increases. When President Trump expanded tariffs on over 70 countries on August 1st, the goal was clear: bring jobs back, secure leverage, and force new trade deals. But within just weeks, the consequences are being felt not in Beijing or Ottawa, but in Detroit, Dallas, and the daily lives of American families. One Detroit auto supplier candidly shared the reality on the ground: "I'm going to have to lay off employees and close a warehouse because of the president's tariffs. We even went to India to procure products to save consumers money, and now India is hit with tariffs too. Everywhere we turn, we're running into roadblocks." It's been discouraging. Major U.S. companies are sounding the alarm. In the second quarter alone, General Motors reported $1.1 billion in tariff-related losses. Ford followed with $800 million. Stanley Black & Decker projects an $800 million hit for the year. Apple has already budgeted $1.1 billion in expected tariff costs for this quarter. These figures aren't isolated incidents, they represent a broader trend across multiple sectors, and the impact is tangible for consumers. Reuters reports that price increases are already visible in everyday goods, from personal care products to electronics. Even the morning cup of coffee isn't immune, with the U.S. importing roughly a third of its coffee from Brazil now subject to new tariffs. North of the border, Canada has also been significantly impacted. On August 1st, a 35% tariff went into effect on Canadian goods outside USMCA rules, including steel, aluminum, softwood lumber, and auto parts. Statistics Canada reports a 13% drop in total exports for Q2 2025, with energy exports down nearly 20%, hitting Alberta hardest. Auto parts and consumer goods also experienced steep declines. Rather than retaliating emotionally, Prime Minister Mark Carney is adopting a strategic approach. Canada isn't just reacting, it's repositioning itself, investing in trade diversification, protecting key sectors, and leveraging long-term relationships rather than chasing short-term wins. Canada is actively boosting trade with Mexico, seeking to solidify a reliable North American partner amid a volatile U.S. trade environment. High-level meetings in Mexico City with Finance Minister François Felipe Champagne and Foreign Minister Anita Anon focused on reinforcing trade ties and resetting diplomatic relations with Mexican President Claudia Sheinbaum. Earlier in the year, Canadian discussions about excluding Mexico from the USMCA created tensions. Now, both nations see the value in mutual support, especially with the 2026 USMCA review approaching and the U.S. favoring bilateral deals. Notably, while Mexico received a 90-day delay on additional tariffs, Canada received no such extension, prompting Ottawa to accelerate its partnership with Mexico. Trump's blunt force approach, raising tariffs, pressuring trade partners, and counting on American resilience, is already producing measurable economic blowback. U.S. labor data estimates that 30,000 to 40,000 manufacturing jobs have been lost in just 4 months. From coffee beans to car parts, Americans are beginning to feel the cost of tariff politics. What began as a tool of foreign policy is now impacting corporate earnings, household budgets, and job stability. While Trump seeks to punish competitors and secure leverage, the collateral damage is accumulating domestically. Meanwhile, Canada isn't waiting for Washington's mood to change. By investing in trade diversification, strengthening regional ties, and building resilience, it is quietly crafting a response that could prove far more effective than retaliation. And as the U.S. economy adjusts, the contrast is clear. One leader fuels instability to force deals, while the other builds a durable foundation to navigate uncertainty. The unfolding situation underscores a critical lesson in modern trade: aggressive policy can deliver short-term leverage, but long-term stability requires foresight, adaptation, and strategic alliances. As tariffs ripple through supply chains, corporations, and consumer markets, the stakes are high not just for international partners, but for everyday Americans across the country.